Welcome to the British Chamber of Commerce Singapore's podcast channel. We're excited to bring you season 3 of new episodes featuring in-depth content across Singapore, ASEAN and the United Kingdom. We've had some extraordinary guests on our channel, including Formula One's Claire Williams.
I'm a firm believer that any great team, any successful team has a great culture flowing through it. You aren't successful if you don't. So we put a lot of work into this.
Renowned mountaineer Kenton Cool.
That 2019 there with a client, a big storm came in and literally destroyed Camp 2. And I've got some video footage of Sherpas like trying to hold on to the tent fabric as it blows away. And
the Royal Navy's Commodore Steve Morehouse, commander of the UK Carrier Strike Group.
The squadron of F-35 aircraft we have on board is a Royal Air Force squadron, and the personnel there are drawn from both the Navy and the Air Force. So what better way of showing just the efficiency and the joined-up nature that we now have.
And distinguished Sky News anchor Jeremy Thompson.
We had 2 little vans with satellite links, and we leapfrogged up the road to Pristina, the capital, throughout that first day, with non-stop coverage from basically inside a war zone.
We also sit down with the likes of TikTok, Twitch and Twitter and continue to bring you conversations around business and trade, leadership and people, sustainability, sports and arts and much, much more. Thank you, as always, for your support and we hope you enjoy this podcast. Hello and welcome to this, our latest episode of In Conversation with me, David Kelly. This is the series brought to you by the British Chamber of Commerce Singapore, where we talk to business leaders and personalities to find out a bit more about them, their businesses, current trends, for all of those things that we're seeing and feeling as a business community. Tech has been a big theme over the last few weeks, with a UK tech delegation having visited Singapore on a trade mission led by Tech Nation, through to the technology-led sport of F1 moving all of their logistics to Singapore and racing here last week. Today, we're talking tech and logistics and putting both of those things together. My guest today has spent more than 20 years of his professional life in international logistics and leadership, with a successful track record of delivering innovative services in challenging environments. He is now the co-founder and CEO of Logchain, a digital platform looking to revolutionize the world of logistics for anyone who makes, moves or consumes goods. Andie, it's brilliant to have you with us today. Thank you so much for your time. I'm really looking forward to this. You've got a great tech business. Let's get stuck in, find out a little bit more about you and your business. So just to get us started, and for those that are unfamiliar about supply chains, it'll be great to get sort of your view around how supply chains actually work.
Well, David, first of all, thanks for the invitation today. I've been really looking forward to this conversation, and it's something that I've got a real passion for. I'm very lucky that I love what I'm doing. I love the industry that I'm in. So they always say, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And that's very true, especially in what can be a challenging industry, but it is something that I love. And you're right. Let's start at the top here. And quite often, people use the terms supply chain and logistics interchangeably, and a lot of that comes from the wider world and how it's reported. And it's not strictly true. There is a distinct difference between them. So really, logistics is about the physical movement of goods and assets itself. So, really, logistics is the moving of raw materials and finished products onto their final customers. Well, supply chain management is more of a broader term, which is associated more with the sourcing of the raw materials, the procurement of consumer requirements, and the actual conversion into the final products. And another difference really of differentiating between the two is logistics. The main objective of logistics management is more about customer satisfaction, while supply chain management is more of an emphasis on competitive advantage. And, those are the two kind of definitions I think would be a good way to put it kind of going forward.
So, I mean, a bit of a silly question, I guess, but why do supply chains and logistics matter? And I'm putting an emphasis on this around the current economic climate, around sort of this post-COVID world. There's been lots of disruption. Why is this so important?
Well, I think first of all, we need to go back, and I think we need to go way back, actually, to the dawn of history itself. And people don't realize the importance of logistics and supply chain. It was the world's second ever science. You know, numeracy, maths was the first ever science that the world saw. Logistics actually comes from the word's logos, which means account. And it's been very much, if it wasn't for logistics, you wouldn't have the world in the shape it is today, because in ancient times, logistics streamlined production and distribution processes, and it generated quantum leaps in scientific knowledge, because along with the movement and transfer of goods, there was a transfer of knowledge. And logistics is at the very core of human history. In fact, one of the oldest surviving documents in the world, it's over 3,700 years old, is a clay tablet pertaining to the supply chain of copper plates. And it is also, interestingly, it shows you things have never changed. It is the world's oldest surviving complaint letter. And it literally contains the words, "You did not do what you promised me." So this, you know, this is how far things go back. And I really mean it when it says it shaped our culture. Italy wouldn't be Italy without pasta. They wouldn't have pasta if it wasn't for the Silk Road. Logistics brought you Italy as you know it today. You know, in China, the spicy food is famous the world over, but they wouldn't have that if it wasn't for supply chains and logistics. Chilies were brought into Southeast Asia in the late 16th century by Dutch and Portuguese seafarers, and they were then taken by Chinese seafarers to China, not for the flavor, but for their beauty. And it wasn't until half a century later that these chilies were used in the actual cuisine in China. But interestingly, it was because of supply chains, because chilies were first used in the Guizhou province. And the exact reason why chilies were used is because they didn't have a salt pit in the entire region, so their food was bland. And this was an impoverished area, so they used chili to enhance the flavor of their food, and chili popularity then spread. So it shows you both the supply of goods and the shortage of goods. So the supply of chilies and the shortage of salt created that opportunity, and it's now part of our culture. So that's the ancient history, really, of supply chain and logistics. But moving forward to the modern day, you're looking at more than 80% of global trade moves by the sea. More than 80% of the entire world's needs. And that's even higher in developing countries. You know, in 2020, there was more than 815 million TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units. So that's shipping containers. More than 815 million 20-foot shipping containers were moved around the world. It is literally the heartbeat of the modern world and modern trade as we need it. And even more, it's becoming even more important, especially in this region, because of food security. Food scarcity is going to be an issue moving forward. Urbanization, it might surprise some of the listeners. Urbanization is very much considered complete in the Western and Northern hemispheres, but urbanization, the moving from the more rural areas, more rural economies, is still ongoing in Asia. And that process is still going to be going on for the next 20 years. That can only be powered by logistics and supply chains. And a lot of people, it's not just food, it's not just goods, but how can you have urbanization of moving millions of people into city centers without the plastics that go into the piping and the plumbing and the wiring of these homes? You know, everything you've ever owned, ever eaten, ever worn was born out of supply chains and was brought to you by logistics. And, you know, it's quite funny. Supply chain was a word that's but still not really well understood by the world, but it came popular and it became global news due to COVID. Now it's in the public eye, but I can tell you, COVID was not the issue. COVID, it was a catalyst. It was a catalyst that brought to the surface problems that were decades in the making. But logistics and supply chain is incredibly important today, and is only going to increase in importance as we move forward over the next few years.
So what are some of the challenges that you've seen that COVID has highlighted? What are the sort of the main things that you're seeing, Andy, that businesses are having to grapple with in terms of logistics and supply chain?
I would say two of the biggest ones would be resilience and people.
Okay.
So there's always been a focus, unfortunately, in logistics. It's always the industry that gets hammered the most, in good times and in bad, because unfortunately, historically, not many companies had a strong representation of supply chain and logistics in the boardroom. So they didn't have a champion to defend it. So it was squeezed in good times and it was reduced in bad times. And that's changing now. You're seeing more and more CEOs actually coming from the logistics and supply chain world. People are starting to realize the importance of this now. But it's also laid bare some philosophies that were actually one of the main pillars of supply chain around the world. Just in time. This is a phrase that a lot of people are familiar with. And in the past, it's always been talked about the companies that don't use it rather than the companies that do use it. Now, this was a fantastic methodology that was born out of Toyota. However, they deployed this from top to bottom, bottom to top. It was completely part of everything from their sales process on the actual forecourt of cars. The information would end up in the chemical factory, making the solvents, which would eventually go into making the windscreens. And it was part of their culture. However, the Western companies, after the 1970s oil crisis, looking for a silver bullet, a quick fix, as always, decided to do a bit of copy paste with just in time and transferred it, and it became this global phenomenon. But unfortunately, all they did was to say, okay, so it's less inventory. There was the problem. They didn't transfer the culture. They didn't transfer the granularity. And what has happened is you've ended up with supply chains that are cheap, and that's the problem. They were cheap. They were not resilient. And a lot of the bottlenecks that came out of COVID and some of the knock-on effects has laid this bare. So the resilience in the supply chain is a major issue that people need to look at. But also people. There's a massive people problem. Logistics is always going to be a business of assets moving assets, but behind that is the people. And it's the people that make the difference. It really is. And the great resignation that has gone on globally that a lot of people have talked about, it's probably hit logistics and supply chain one of the worst. There's a truck driver shortage all over the world. Excuse the crude image here, but the young generation don't want to pee in a bottle in a lay-by. Who wants to do that? And even the white-collar workers in logistics and supply chain, who wants to spend 12 hours in an office with a very aggressive industry, with high demands, high demands from customers, high demands from your own company? There's a huge shift away from this, and companies need to realize this and address this and start to make this very important industry more attractive for the younger generations to come into.
How exposed has the industry been over the last couple of years, certainly through COVID? And how, I guess, sort of a follow-on question to that is how can companies in that ecosystem ease the current issues? Because it must be enormous for, say, small businesses that are shipping goods all over the world that are reliant on income coming in and exporting of parts of products, and it's an enormous part of how the global economy works. So what have been those issues, and how does the ecosystem sort of go ahead and try and fix some of those?
Well, the first thing you need to do with any problem is admit it exists. And that is unfortunately still a major barrier. And this comes from, I'm sorry to say this, it comes from a lot of the leadership and the C-suites. I always say the 6 magic words of business. I don't know, and I effed up. These are phrases that you must embrace. And unfortunately, there's a lot of companies out there are still not admitting that there is an issue. What you need to do is admit that the problems exist and then proactively bring parties together. Supply chain and logistics is always going to be an ecosystem, but unfortunately, historically, the industry has always been quite binary thinking and always kind of thinking about their interactions in their business as a zero-sum game. The future is an ecosystem-driven approach, not an ego system. driven approach. And, some of these challenges, here's a little factoid for you. So there's an Accenture study earlier this year, and 78% of CEOs said that AI-powered demand forecasting would have a major impact on their businesses in the next 5 years. That's quite a punchy statistic. The problem is AI doesn't exist. The Turing test has not been passed. This is the problem. You've got companies, you've got leadership who are using buzzwords because it's popular and because it's fashionable and saying this will be a major area. AI technology does not even exist yet. Machine learning does, but that is light years away from AI. And unfortunately, whether it's AI, whether it's blockchain, if you grab these and think it's going to be a silver bullet for your business, I'm sorry, you're going to be left behind. You need to admit there's a problem, and you need to focus on your processes. It's, logistics and supply chain management, it's always going to be about people, processes and data and assets. Start with your processes and talk to your people.
So I mean, taking that forward, people right at the heart, right, in a global planet trying to make a profit. So it's your 3 Ps, isn't it? The people, planet, profit piece. Do you consider this to be a zero-sum game?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And this has always been the approach, unfortunately, in all business. All businesses view this as a zero-sum game, and that is definitely changing now. There's a number of factors that are going to be impacting this. So about 2 years ago, I coined the term Instagramonomics, because these social media platforms now have a major impact on businesses globally.
Yeah.
All you need is to have a picture of an orangutan that has been singed by a fire from a slash and burn in a palm oil plantation in East Malaysia. The right influencer gets onto Instagram, onto TikTok, and before you know it, companies like Procter & Gamble, L'Oreal, Unilever have got major problems that their massive marketing machines cannot handle, because the younger generations are becoming smarter and more ethical in their buying choices. And only earlier this week, the massive conglomerate that own designer houses such as Alexander McQueen, they have actually came out very publicly and instructed that all of their businesses cannot use greenwashing anymore. Stop talking about this as a green product and that it's sustainable and that it's net zero, because people are realizing, and it's going to be the brands that are going to lead this, because they're going to see the risk to their business. The brand power is all in the trust of that brand. And greenwashing, people are going to get caught out by it. And it's going to destroy your brand. So that is an impact on the business. You need to protect your brand and the faith your customers have in you by modernizing your supply chains. But there's also governmental pressure now coming. So with Scope 3 under the COP26 meeting out of Glasgow, this is still something that is terrifying the industry. And, I can tell you a lot of the manufacturers out there are pushing this onto the supply chain companies, saying, fix this, give us the magic bullet, but don't increase any prices. Again, they're not admitting there's a problem here. But that government pressure is going to continue to build. So that is the thing. A sustainable and resilient supply chain only helps. Of course, people, planet, profit. You need profit to help the people, and then the people can help the profit. The planet. Yes, profits are important, but it's not a zero-sum game. And besides, more and more now, product provenance is more important. The story behind the product, more boutique products. This only drives greater value within supply chains and actually allows you, again, about building your brand, obtaining a higher price for your products. People care more about, especially when you get into higher priced goods, people care more about the story behind the product and the brand behind the product rather than the actual physical attributes itself.
So we talked about some of the challenges and you just highlighted there some of the opportunities. I think this would be a great sort of point to sort of ask you around how did Logchain come about, and how, through your experience in the industry, have you built your company to support this activity?
That's a good question. Thanks, David. And really, my entire career has been built out of change management, going into companies where they've had challenges or companies that are looking for change. And it's something that I love. And again, it's, you might say there's something wrong with me to be really kind of passionate about that, but it's something that I really enjoy, because change management is about people. Change management, it's never the what, it's always the why, and behind the why is the people. And, you know, I realized there's more and more technology that was coming into the industry. We've never seen so much internal and external investment into technology. And unfortunately, you know, I was quite often a gatekeeper within companies for companies to come in. And quite often you would sit in a room with very, very clever people who would develop some very clever solutions for which no problem exists. And trust me, we've got enough problems that need addressing, you know. And unfortunately, quite often you would sit down and you would meet the CEO, you would meet the CTO, these very clever people who've done all this technology. Where's the domain knowledge? Quite often they wouldn't have a logistician in the room, somebody from supply chain management. They're not understanding the pain points. We always talk about, within Logchain, you know, KYC is something that's known the world over. Know your customer. But we are focused on KYP, know your pain. You know, an individual customer needs to understand their pain, and we need to be able to provide that solution. And this was really kind of the genesis. So myself and my co-founder, who's also called Andie, just to keep things nice and confusing. And yes, it does create some challenges sometimes. But we realized that this change has to come from within. Yes, technology is going to move our industry into the 21st century. It is ridiculous that we are in the 21st century. We're sending tourists to space for fun, but we cannot send a shipping container across a stretch of water without the use of clipboards, paperwork, hundreds of emails, dozens of phone calls, and fax machines. We're still using, we've got people floating around in space taking selfies, and we're still using fax machines to move products around the world. This has to stop. And technology is fantastic, but it's not a silver bullet. You know, technology is an enabler, and that's the approach, what we have done with Logchain. And it's a very simple solution to a very nebulous problem within the industry. It's an information visibility layer. We allow the capture of information at the blue collar level, because all too often, lots of these Logitech businesses are focused on the white collar worker, someone sitting behind a desk in an office, probably in a different country to where the operations are taking place. And if you think you can secure the data by the time it gets to that point, I'm sorry, you're wrong. You know, the vast majority of supply chain data is created by and interacted with blue collar workers on the ground. These are the people who need the technology. These are the people you need to make their lives easier. These are the people you need to talk to when you're doing your process mapping internally, whether you're bringing in new technology. You need to talk to the people on the ground using it. And this is exactly the approach that we've had, because we focus on blue collar workers, and especially we need to make sure that our technology is fit for purpose for smaller companies, micro companies and SMEs. Because again, logistics and supply chain is quite unique as an industry, because you have micro and massive businesses interacting with each other within the same value chain. Massive chemical companies, I've dealt with myself in Indonesia, having contracts with local trucking companies, father and son teams, one truck, two trailers. These guys can't communicate with legacy systems such as SAP and Oracle and expensive platforms such as TradeLens. They need something light, they need something agile, they need something that adds value, whether you're a micro business or a massive business. And that's what we're looking to do. We're looking to transform the industry, whether you make, move, or consume goods, and bring in a new era of trust. Now, yes, we are blockchain at the back end, but we are not blockchain evangelists. I don't think blockchain cures cancer. I don't think blockchain allows founders to walk on water, but it's a very good tool for our industry, because it's not a low trust environment, it's a zero trust environment. And we need to pivot into this new era of trust with that technology as the background.
How much of what what you're building. I mean, it's really, really interesting. I know we've had many conversations, Andy, over the last sort of couple of months, but how much of this is going to be truly disruptive for the industry?
No, that's a great question, and hopefully not much. Hopefully not much, because we want to be transformative, not disruptive. So again, this is a lot of Logitech businesses use that term because it's popular. It comes out of Silicon Valley. Disruptive is always what you must aim for. And that's always the buzzwords that you use in the B2C market in areas such as Grab, Uber, Theranos, WeWork. Well, they didn't really pan out long term, did they? Now, what you need to do is transform the industry. And this was something that we were focused on from day one, was to really make sure that our product and our company adds value and helps out every single stakeholder within the supply chain. So we don't want this to become a fantastic tool for manufacturers, but is an albatross around the necks of 3PLs and trucking companies. We want every single user of Logchain to see the benefits, safety, the additional resilience that it brings, and enjoy the fact that they're using Logchain. We are very focused on making sure that people enjoy this fact, and focus on the people. That is where the solution starts. And we really do hope, and we're already starting to see it with early customers, the fact that you can bring these players together in a very light and agile way and move things forward. A typical logistics executive handles between 200 and 400 emails per day. People are swamped and overloaded with data. We cannot manage the data that we're handling right now, because there's always three flows when it comes to logistics. There's the physical flow, the financial flow, and the data flow. And even when you take a look at global trade as GDP, you've got physical and financial flow, but the flow of data is exponentially growing beyond all of it. And IoT is the next generation. There's a big bang going on right now. There is more than 1 million IoT devices being brought into existence every single day. Our industry cannot cope with the data that it has today. How on earth can it cope with this influx of data that's coming in? And that's why we're trying to provide that infrastructure, that data visibility layer. We're completely independent. We're a solutions provider, not a service provider. All too often, tech companies start eating their own customers. We don't want to do that. We want to be like the Microsoft Windows of the logistics world, providing that operating system and adding value and bringing trust.
Super. And I just thinking about that huge amount of data, that is, from a sustainability perspective, creates a lot of CO2, doesn't it, in terms of data centers and processing. How does your system seek to sort of combat some of that and sort of reduce and support the green agenda and make the industry sort of more efficient from that perspective?
No, it's a great question. And I see data in transit and data at rest as one of the biggest unforeseen icebergs, carbon icebergs in the entire industry. So why is this important? So supply chains generate more than 60% of global emissions. In scope 3, COP26, this is the area that needs fixing the most, generating more than 60%. So just to give you some facts here, a typical email will generate between 0.06 grams and up to 35 grams of carbon, and a single email. Now let's go back to that typical logistics executive between 400 and 600 emails per day. 815 million containers being moved around the world. This is the big challenge. So we are actually Logchain, along with Monash University and the Global Supply Chain Council. We're about to be conducting a very large study into this, because unfortunately, a lot of the studies done into our industry, again, like I mentioned, that Accenture, no offense, Accenture or Gartner, but a lot of these companies, they'll ask questions of the CEO, who's probably never, quite often hasn't seen a truck in decades. And they ask these ethereal questions. We are going out there to actually establish how bad this problem is, how many emails you're dealing with, how much paperwork, how much PDFs. You've got all of this. This is just the data in transit. So you're talking about a single piece of data within the supply chain is handled multiple times by dozens of different people across dozens of different systems, just single pieces of data. Now that's the data in transit, which has got a massive carbon footprint, but across the supply chain ecosystem, all of those companies, due to regulatory and government requirements, have to keep their data between 7 and 15 years. So all of the supply chain data is multiplied and multiplied, whether it's in transit or at rest. So that is a massive impact in terms of carbon, reducing that alone by having a single source of truth, a single visibility layer that people can draw notifications out of, rather than having all of these emails and people chasing information. But it's not just that. The information flow is what will keep the wheels turning faster. People don't realize the knock-on effect of having efficient data will be within the supply chain. So when you look at demurrage, so demurrage is a cost within logistics where an asset is being detained. So a truck, instead of taking 2 hours to load, takes 5. Additional costs, that's engines running, it's additional costs within it. And the same with ships. And demurrage around the world, 70% of all demurrage is down to missing or incorrect data. This is engines, this is missed journeys. These are additional journeys made by trucks, other vehicles, and other assets that can be avoided with more resilient data sources that you can trust. Now, all of a sudden, you've got a more efficient supply chain, which means you can do more with the assets that you have. So this means you need less assets to move the same amount of goods. This is all about bringing efficiency, which is only going to drive the bottom line. So again, this goes back to people, planet, profit is not a zero-sum game. But you need to start with the data. Well, no, admit there's a problem, then look at your processes and look at your data.
So looking to the future, looking at a way of supply chains of the future, what do you think are some of the main challenges that supply chains have, and sort of what are the next sort of steps for Logchain as a business in terms of addressing some of those?
Well, there is a lot. There is a lot going on in this area at the moment. So automation is going to have a big impact on supply chains globally. So let's talk about first things, outside of Logchain. So automation, that is going to drive a lot of changes. So there's a lot of talk about nearshoring and onshoring. So that is the process of taking manufacturing from China. China's still very much the factory of the world, taking manufacturing from places like China for European products and nearshoring it into countries such as Turkey and other areas such as that, to reduce this dependence upon very long supply chains with extreme bottlenecks. When you look at the growth in the size of vessels, it is crazy now. The vessels continue to grow, but these ports are bottlenecked in. Because again, going back to human history, London was a port town. All of your big cities around the world, they were all originally port towns, and these ports are hemmed in by the cities that have grown around them. These ships have grown exponentially during my time in logistics. But the problem is the infrastructure has not grown, so there's a bottleneck there. And bigger is not always better. Look at the failure of the A380. Everybody thought that was going to be the next 747. And all the airplane companies in the world were racing to say, we have to take over from the king of the sky, the 747. And the A380 got it. And, Airbus, everybody thought they'd won this battle. Then there was pushback from the infrastructure around the world because it slowed down turnaround times for airports. And it wasn't as efficient as things like the Dreamliners. This is the problem. It was this thinking of bigger is always better. And they've done the same with vessels, but it's more about driving the efficiency and the infrastructure inland. So automation's got to be one part of it. Geopolitics. We look at what is going on in the world right now. Look at the impact that the terrible things that are going on in Ukraine with the war with Russia has had a global impact, which has, of course, had a knock-on effect to inflation. It is arguable, the fall of the Soviet Union essentially protected a lot of inflationary pressures because the Soviet Union wasn't consuming as much and was providing a lot of raw materials to the world. So geopolitics is an issue. China with semiconductors risks with Taiwan, these ongoing issues. These are something I would dare not even predict. Geopolitics, who knows what's going to happen? Nobody would have predicted Brexit. Nobody would have predicted Trump. But they happened. They might happen again. So geopolitics that is definitely an uncertainty which is completely random, and I think it's very hard to try and plan against. But decarbonisation and energy transition, that's going to be another major part of supply chain and logistics around the world. You're already starting to see now in Europe, chemical manufacturing moving to completely electric productions, moving away from the fossil fuel dependency. This is something that is going to be a global issue. And again, we talked about this earlier, hiring people. It's always for the foreseeable future. And remember, AI is not going to come and save us all tomorrow. And yes, we do need technology, but behind that technology, we still need very smart, very passionate people to keep this very important industry moving forward. And the industry needs to become more attractive to these younger people to come in. The world has moved forward, and the logistics and supply chain industry needs to move forward if it wants to survive.
Andie, great that you brought it all back to people. This has been a great conversation, and there's a question that we ask all of our guests, which is, and this is about you. If I could offer you the British Chamber of Commerce Singapore's time machine, and with all of your knowledge and your experience in the sector, you can take yourself back to a younger Andie and you can give yourself some advice at a younger age. What advice would you give yourself?
Network. I was very much more aggressive when I was younger. I remember when I was first introduced to supply chain and logistics, I was working in civil engineering on the railway in the UK, and my old boss increased my area responsibility with a promotion, and he put me in charge of supply chain, logistics, plant, material. And he sat me down and was very blunt, and he says, "It's awful. The people are awful. Every day there's something on fire, and I want you to deal with this." And it was very much, I took an approach, an old style legacy approach of might was right, and really trying to solve problems, treat every single battle as a war. And really, it's about networking and working with smarter people and having that ecosystem approach, sitting down with people who are in the same value chain as you, talking about the problems that you have, asking about the problems that they have. And you might be impacting them in ways that you don't realize. Sit down. The future is an ecosystem-driven approach, not an ego-driven approach. Sit down and communicate with people, and you will do wondrous things. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Andie, you've always been a fixer. Thank you so much for fixing this time with me today. It's been great to have you on in conversation with. Thanks so much.
Very much enjoyable. Thank you, David.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the British Chambers podcast. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe, and why not leave us a rating and review on Spotify, Apple, Google, and the other podcast platforms. For more information, please visit our website at www.britcham.org.sg and tune in next time for a brand new episode.